I want to pick up a few comments which have been left on the video that I made about the post office. Rachel Oliver says, the post office is a failing business model. It trades on the Royal Mail background it once proudly heralded with all the trust that enshrined. It isn't a service, it's an asset-stripping predator. The Exotic Doll says, my post office within W.H. Smith is closing down on the 28th of December and the staff have all jumped ship as they're not entitled to redundancy pay as they were employed for less time and only part-timers. So they have now drafted in staff from Lincoln to run the Boston post office. There's a W.H. Smith sale of 30%, but the stock is still not shifting. Pedra Hooligan says, I agree with your sentiments and credit the way you keep it together in the face of so much gross incompetence. Just one point, though, on shelving projects. When it becomes clear on such badly considered and implemented projects that they will go massively over budget and cannot justify the final projected cost, it is correct to cancel them. Spending further money on a failing project is not justifiable. Well, if you've spent so much money on a project, then and particularly if it's public money, then you have a duty to get it right from the beginning. And we can't simply be spending money and then saying, oh, sorry, this doesn't work. Let's stop spending money. Kevin, a large part of the problem is that the post office is not a private company and doesn't have to make a profit. So inefficient systems and people are tolerated rather than being improved or dismissed. No, I think that's also wrong. Whether a private company or a public company, the problem with the post office is we don't know what it is. And bits of it are public, bits of it are private. And it's so confused and nobody takes responsibility. It's the concept of responsibility. To whom and how? And that is the problem. Custo Secretus says, what institution is not failing? The banks, because profit is privatised and debt socialised. The UK is in such a sorry state, and it's not down to Brexit. The country has been run into the ground. I'm afraid I disagree. I think it's all down to Brexit and the run-up to Brexit. And Nicholas Bethel says, perhaps your GP didn't follow up your pointless blood test because there was no point. I don't mean to minimise your justified dissatisfaction with your treatment. Did your GP feel that they had to offer you some kind of medical intervention, even a pointless one? No. I'm a cancer survivor, and I had clear symptoms, and I eventually got the scans that were necessary, but it took me 3 months, and that shouldn't be happening. And the pointless blood test was utterly pointless. It was there because I went to see a locum, and he gave me the wrong documentation as well. So thank you for all your various comments and suggestions. They're all very much appreciated. And the post office, if we go back to looking at how the post office has emerged in its present form, since the 1980s, the UK has seen a marked decline in local bank branches and small businesses, and this has tended to increase the importance of the post office. So the Post Office Act of 1969 reorganised it into a public corporation. It began formalising some of the community responsibilities that it would take over. The 1980s financial deregulation and the closure of many banks in the 1980s, the post office increasingly became the sole provider of basic financial services in many areas. And this informal shift towards providing financial and community services began as bank closures created service gaps that the post office filled out of necessity. And this is particularly important during the 1984 to 1985 miners' strike. And during that time, it was often a central place for the community for discussions, for financial assistance. It was a meeting place. The 1995 review tried to formally reorganize the post office's community role, and the Post Office Review in 1995 highlighted its importance in sustaining local communities, particularly in response to the bank closures and the decline of rural shops. And then 1997, the Labour government's introduction of community funding programs, which included the effort to support post offices as social and economic hubs, and they were wheeling in Horizon at about that time. The Postal Services Act in 2000 was an attempt to modernise the postal system and reorganise the system so that it could expand beyond its traditional services. So recognising the growing role that the post office was playing in financial services, again because of the bank closures. The post office card account in 2003, introduced to allow people without traditional bank accounts to receive government benefits directly through post offices, reinforcing their role in community financial services. Now, of course, that has since changed, and money goes straight into people's bank accounts if they have them. So it becomes more complex. We see the retiring of real banks from the high street, and yet at the same time an imposition by government on ordinary people to have bank accounts, and the post office being pulled out of the system. The 2008 financial crisis intensified the trend of bank closures, with major banks shutting branches across the UK, and this reinforced the post office's role as an essential financial service provider, leading to the expansion of services like bill payments, savings, even mortgages through the post office money service. Then you've got the network transformation program between 2012 and 2018 to attempt to modernize the post office network to ensure its community role, maintaining branches in rural and hard-to-reach areas, underscoring the commitment to bridge service gaps left by bank and business closures. The digital inclusion initiatives from 2010 onwards, and the post office began offering broadband and digital services, again to support connectivity in underserved areas. The pandemic in 2020, the post office's role as an essential community lifeline. It facilitated access to cash, financial services, government payments, while serving as a critical point for communication and support during lockdowns. And then the levelling up policies have pointed to the post office as a partner in efforts to level up disadvantaged areas. So these shifting economic landscapes, this sort of tectonic movement, financial movement, dominated or characterized by the declining local banking infrastructure and the need for accessible public services, have meant that the post office has expanded its traditional role. So the closure of banks and small businesses left gaps in the community, which were then filled by the post office. So now if the post office is closed, there is nothing to pick up that support. And it's as if suddenly with the new government we have we have an illusion that the post office does not have a social and community function. It is simply a business that needs to be trimmed down because it's no longer doing its job. But that isn't true. And we have to see the present irresponsibility on the part of the government, on the part of the post office, on the part of Royal Mail, in the context of these very specific policies which buttress the post office to take up to be there to replace the role that had previously been served by the banks. So this is a sort of a disjointed and an irresponsible approach to post office management. We've seen that in the past with the way the Horizon system has been managed, the way the sub-postmasters have been cheated. We've seen grand words like compensation being touted around. Compensation is for when somebody has done something wrong and money is then offered as a demonstration of regret by the government or by the company that's caused the problem. In this particular case, there's not only compensation which is necessary, there's restitution. The post office must return the money that it stole from the sub-postmasters. And in the debate, that word hasn't been used. We haven't used the word steal or theft, but that's what it amounts to. The post office took money from the sub-postmasters, and that must be returned. And that is an independent issue to the compensation which should be paid. There are two things. Rishi Sunak and people who are making grand pronouncements in government have tried their hardest to confuse the two. They shouldn't be confused. And then there's the issue of blame, Paula Venables and all this rubbish. And then there's the issue of repairing the damage and ensuring the post office still does its job, because there isn't another institution available to fulfill these various services which the post office has now been forced to offer, because banks and businesses have been allowed to leave the local communities. So it is appalling. I think somebody said it's appalling that the government is now leaving Mrs. Smith to toddle on her walker frame 20 miles to try and access these services, because there isn't a post office in her local village. There isn't a post office or a bank in the local town. There isn't even a bus route. And this is the problem. And when it comes to these smaller post offices within W.H. Smith or within a local cafe or whatever, these are being pulled back as well. So as I found the other day when I went to what was called a post office, it's not a post office, it's some sort of receiving shop. It doesn't really work as a post office. And that is a decision by the local council as well as the local post office. Can you get in touch with anybody to discuss that? No, because the local council doesn't respond and the post office has got a series of numbers and they don't respond either. I've left messages. It's like speaking into the void. And as for medical issues, well, you know, the system doesn't work well there either. But it's about not looking holistically at everything. And our obsession at the moment with apportioning blame rather than making things work. If we did this during the heady days of the Blitz and the Second World War, we would not have survived.